Yann, CEO of Parafed Auckland, here to talk about well-being and resilience. So yesterday we interviewed Rachel Grunwell, who talked about sleep and how we can improve sleep and the relationship between sleep and performance. Today I found another expert by the name of Petar Milojev. Petar, I think that's about how we say your name.
You actually said it right. Yeah, thanks, man.
Awesome. All right, Pete, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So my name is Petar, and thank you, Yann, for bringing me on board with this. So I am a social psychologist working both in the research sphere as well as in the applied sphere when it comes to performance coaching, leadership development, organization development, and things like that. And a lot of my work revolves both in research and applications, revolves around well-being, not only from a psychological perspective, but from a broader systemic perspective, which I think is a little bit of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. All right. To give you guys a little bit of context, and also for you, Petar, over the past few weeks, it's going to be the 4th week of lockdown today. A lot of emotions, a lot of questions, a lot of inquiries from our followers and our members at Parafed Auckland. And the goal was to try to find experts in their domain to try to help us, I would say, live a little bit better that situation. And also, I really believe in this situation, and what we do to improve our life today will help us in the future. So it's not necessarily just a lockdown workshop that we are providing at the moment, but there is a broader objectives of just well-being. Another kind of context, Petar and I are friends actually. He's living just right here from me. So we kind of quarantined together, having coffee 6 feet apart. And we've talked about that kind of emotions and stress that we're living at the moment. And Petar actually gave me a document that he wrote about resilience and how to deal with it. So the goal with those videos is to try to give you guys that are following us some tips and tricks that we can do, kind of exercise that we can solve, questions that we can ask ourselves to try to leave the situation better. So let's start by the first question. That workshop is called Not a Resilience Workshop. Why that title? And maybe the broader question, what is resilience?
Okay, thanks, man. So maybe you're right. Maybe that's a misleading title. And maybe we start off with the question of what resilience is. And one of the things that I liked in what you just said a few minutes ago is that we're not aiming just to do better now. We are aiming to bolster our well-being to be able to do better in the future so that we can actually potentially grow from this. Now, this is important because when we conceptualize resilience versus call it fragility, this is one of the kind of key distinctions, right? So on the one hand, what we can have is fragility of a person or of a system, right? It's essentially a trait or a disposition whereby a system breaks when put under pressure or when put in uncertainty, especially uncertainty, and various forms of load. On the other hand, we can talk about resilience, which is essentially the property of a system, so you, me, or any other person, to essentially remain unchanged under pressure. And even if we take it a step further into a slightly more expanded version, to grow when put under pressure or uncertainty. Okay, and I think it's fairly obvious to everybody how this is actually linked to well-being. Being more resilient is likely to guard you against all of those unpleasant surprises that life throws at us, and it inevitably does. So a lot of resilience is around various systemic components like your physiology, as well as your psychological components like how you deal with stress, how you regulate your emotions, and things like that. Now, the reason I called the document I sent through to you not a resilience workshop is that in a traditional sense, the resilience workshops are designed to teach you now how to adapt better in the future. Okay, so like most training, you're preparing now for those surprises that will happen. The thing about our current situation is that we have all been unpleasantly surprised, and we have all been thrown into a situation right now. So instead of teaching resilience for the future, the idea really is to work out what are the things that we have to do right now to stabilize and to bolster our well-being, so that we can start talking about that growth and all of those other components. So it's not resilience workshop as such. It is essentially, this is what we're doing right now. So I think I called it fundamentals of well-being for people who find themselves in a bit of a pickle, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what kind of principles or area are we going to try to work on?
Okay, so it's a good question, because when people talk about resilience, and many people will have seen this either online or through their workplaces and workshops and things like that, mostly people talk about mental resilience. And they teach skills about how to mitigate your emotions, how to set goals, and all that sort of stuff. The point about resilience and well-being, health, and all that sort of stuff is that it is systemic. And what I mean by that is that it isn't enough to have a resilient mindset. It isn't enough to have a resilient body as far as you can. You have to work on both. There are physiological processes that underpin your cognitive processes, and the key is to be able to make those two work together. So the reason for having multiple sort of foundational areas of resilience is that you have to have a physiological foundation so that you can trust your body, so that you can trust your reactions, and you have to be engaged on a psychological level so that you can start interpreting the world from possibly a more positive perspective, or at least a more empowering and growth-oriented perspective. So we will be when we talk about this, we talk about multiple components, and very broadly, we call them physiological, psychological, and social, because the social support component, as you will know, is hugely important.
And you talk about the mental and the body. When we're talking about the body, and Parafed Auckland members, most of them are athletes or at least recreational sports people. Are we talking about fitness and sleep? So I'm doing the link with Rachel Grunwell and our video from yesterday. Are we really talking about that?
Well, to an extent, we're talking about that as being very important. So the way I like to think about it, based on a lot of the research out there, is that you can sequence three components of the physiological part of the system, all right? And if we lay them out in order of importance, the most important one is sleep. So it is really, really cool that you have done that video, because your biggest tool for promoting your health physiologically and psychologically, and also the biggest tool for destroying it, is your sleep. Very small variations in sleep quality, sleep length can have massive effects on your lived experience. And this is a very important aspect to keep in mind, because the first thing that tends to be sacrificed when we find ourselves in a chronically stressed situation, so rather than acute stress of, oh my god, there is a lion, but a chronic stress, which is, oh my god, there's a virus for like 4 weeks, the first thing that goes is your sleep. And that's why we put that as the most important thing to start keeping an eye out on. The second, and this is familiar to probably most of your members, is nutrition. And I like to call it very simply, it's a very simple principle. It's do not eat crap, for a very simple reason. All right. And by crap, I usually mean, well, the research tends to suggest sugars, so simple carbohydrates, and processed stuff. For the simple reason that sugars or ingestion of sugar can dramatically alter your physiological state on the endocrine level. What that means is that if you take a dose of sugar, what it leads to, firstly, is an increase in blood sugar, followed by a massive drop in blood sugar because your body tries to regulate it. And that drop in blood sugar becomes read by your body as dangerous. And your body starts reacting by releasing those survival hormones, the ones that make you feel anxious, and the ones that make a child throw a temper tantrum. So if you want to build a body that you can trust, you need to have a body that doesn't do that. That's the idea. So
Makes
staying
sense.
away from quite important.
So then the next one will be fitness and try to move as much as we can.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And, you were talking about socialization and also taking control. So I think that's the next step.
Yep. So once we've talked about the physiological components, so the sleep, the eating, and the movement, and I don't think we need to talk much about the movement given the athletic nature of the organization, right? We start talking about the kind of the next level things. So the fourth component is taking control, but by taking control, I mean taking control of your mind. And this is hugely important.
Okay.
Emotional regulation is basically begins by you being able to control your consciousness, and that begins by being aware of it.
Okay. I guess we'll leave that for a next video, but then I think you have an exercise for us for that first video.
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the key things that are happening right now to most people is whether you like it or not, and whether you're aware of it or not, you will be stressed. On some levels, things may look perfectly normal, but you will, on a physiological level, be experiencing a level of stress. And we can talk more about the anatomy of it in the next video. The point is, it will be there. And it is your job to spot it. Because if you don't spot your stress, it will creep up and start eating away at your well-being, eating away at your sleep, and eating away at your mood. You will be feeling more anxious, more depressed, and things like that. So the best place to start taking control of these things, first and foremost, is to identify your stress. And for that, in our little non-resilience, non-workshop, we have an exercise, which is deceptively simple. And I think you've done it. And it's a very simple exercise, but it takes a bit of work.
Right. I'll try to explain the exercise.
Please.
And how it was helpful. Most of the time we have trouble putting names on emotion or adjectives to how we feel. And this exercise is really simple. 2 columns. The first column is the symptoms, and the second one is worries. And tell me if I'm wrong, but the worries is just kind of simple questions or simple affirmations around what worries us. So for example, I put on mine, and due to the situation, what happened if I got COVID-19, or what happened if a family member gets it. So those are all like simple stuff that worries me. It was a little bit harder, I must say, on the symptoms part, because I had trouble putting adjectives on how I feel. And for most of them, it was irritability, anger, hunger sometimes. And it was really helpful. So I put it on my fridge, and it sits there since maybe a week now. And it's really helpful to be aware of our emotions.
Absolutely.
So maybe you can talk a little bit more about this exercise and what it's going to bring. And I think we're going to close the video on that.
Sounds good. All right. So basically, I was really happy to have Yann do the exercise. So it was really cool just to kind of get out of my head and discuss it over our coffee. So the point of the exercise really is to get you thinking about the things you don't normally think about, which is those feelings and those emotions and those physiological feelings that you might be having that actually signify stress. Now, the right-hand column, which you might make it the right-hand column, the worries, is usually easier for people to get into, because it's very easy to start rattling off things you're worried about. What if I get sick? What if mom gets sick? What if wife gets sick? What if my job is not there anymore? What if this lasts for a year, etc., etc.? All perfectly valid worries. The thing that is more difficult is to start talking about what are the actual symptoms of stress that I'm experiencing. And unless you do this on a daily basis, which most people really don't, it becomes difficult to spot that you might be a little bit irritable. You may tend to press the snooze button 1 or 2 extra times in the morning. You may find yourself reaching for sugary foods a bit more often than you normally do, which may feel perfectly normal because after all, we're in lockdown. But it's actually a stress reaction. You may find yourself waking up in the middle of the night a few too many times. You may find yourself being more easily annoyed by people in your house. You may find yourself a bit distractible. So when you're sitting there and reading, all of a sudden your mind, your eyes are going all over the place. These are all possible symptoms of stress. And it is important to be able to spot them, because then you can mitigate things. You can mitigate things for your own reactions and your own emotions, as well as for how you're communicating with people who are close to you. Our own stress that we don't know about, that we don't see, can lead to a lot of interpersonal issues, right? You can find yourself being a bit more snappy with people you're communicating with for no good reason whatsoever. So it's important to be able to spot these things. So what this exercise does is it gives you, on the one hand, the tool to take your stress that is unconscious, that is invisible, and put it on a piece of paper. And the moment you do that, it becomes less powerful, it becomes less scary, and it becomes something you can work with. And then the right-hand column, the worries, basically takes all of your worries, puts them on a piece of paper, and allows you to start assessing whether there's something you can do about them or not. And that's something we move on to in later portions of the workshop.
Yeah, I guess the next step will be taking control and kind of noticing when we can control and what we cannot control. That's it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That becomes a very important thing, right? Because if you will see a lot of the worries you have listed, a lot of the worries I have listed are things that we can do absolutely nothing about. So, but it really is. That's kind of how it is. So it becomes very important to realize that and work out strategies around things that you can do something about, which are things like your sleep, your feeding, your training, your mindfulness, and your social orientation or engagement with your social circle.
Awesome. All right. To help our followers and our members, we will put a template of that first exercise with that video. In the meantime, don't hesitate to put comments and questions and fire out. We're going to try to answer them all in the next video. And thank you very much, Petar. See you on the next one.
All right. See you soon.
Awesome. Bye, guys.